Boris Red 4.0
includes a redesigned paint system which enables the user to modify any stroke within any project at any time. This tutorial provides a basic introduction on how to use this powerful new paint system. To begin, launch
Boris Red 4.0
and delete any tracks that are present in the timeline. Next, create paint media using each of the following methods in turn. Select the paint tool that you want to work with from the toolbar. Let's take the paintbrush in this example and begin painting in the composite window within the canvas area. As soon as the brush is laid to the canvas, a paint media filter track appears in the timeline and the parameter controls for paint appear in the controls window. Go to the Filters menu and choose Effects, Paint, or press the Add Paint Layer button in the Timeline button array. The available parameters in the Controls window display the settings for the current stroke while painting, or the next stroke when making adjustments to the settings. Each paint stroke has its own sublayer within the paint filter. To change an existing stroke, select its track in the timeline. Undesired paint strokes can be removed by first selecting the stroke in the timeline and then pressing the backspace key on your keyboard. The paint media track that appears in the timeline is comprised of the following items: the paint track layer, the paint path subtrack, paint strokes subtracks, the brush image and transformation subtracks. The paint track layer, when selected, displays in the controls window global parameters for all of the nested paint strokes. There are two tabs for this track in the controls window. The Global Paint tab sets the paint on all nested paint strokes, the global opacity for all nested strokes, and the stroke begin and end for all strokes. The Global Transform tab contains parameters which can be used to reposition, rotate, and scale all nested paint strokes. The Paint Path subtrack, when selected, displays the Paint tab. Use the parameters in the Paint tab to set up a stroke prior to creating it. This tab contains the basic parameters for creating a stroke: color, opacity, and brush size. Depending on the type of paint that you are working with, you will see different options in the Paint tab. A separate paint stroke subtrack is created each time you make a new paint stroke. A paint stroke subtrack, when selected, displays three tabs: Paint, Animation, and Transform. Each track is named for the brush type used in the stroke. For example, when a clone brush is used, the track is named Clone Stroke. The parameters in the Paint tab are the same as the parameters in the Path Tracks Paint tab. However, they differ in that they allow you to adjust an already created stroke. The Animation tab allows you to animate a paint stroke by setting its beginning and end. The Transform tab contains parameters which can be used to reposition, rotate, and scale selected paint strokes. Because the paint system supports Wacom technology, we can use the feedback from the Wacom pressure-sensitive tablet to modify the appearance of any paint stroke. For instance, the color of a stroke can be set so that it changes from color to color alt based on the pressure, velocity, direction of a stroke. These options can also be applied to the paint opacity and brush size. In this part of the tutorial, we will make a single stroke and familiarize ourselves with the basic paint controls. Press the on-screen Controls menu button below the composite window. Disable the checkerboard option to give the composite window a black background. At the bottom of the Controls window, set the Animation Mode button to Static Mode. The button is gray when set to static mode. Delete any tracks in the timeline. Click on the brush icon in the Timeline button array. Paint tracks are created in the timeline. Set the following values in the Controls window: brush type, color, color modulation, none, color, white, hardness, 0, flatness, 0, opacity modulation, none, opacity, 100, size modulation, none, size 50, dab scatter 0, dab spacing 15, angle 0, jitter frequency 20. Make a single continuous stroke in the composite window in the shape of the letter S. The stroke should fill most of the canvas in the composite window. If you are using a Wacom tablet, use light pressure at the start of the stroke and increase the pressure on the tablet as you move toward the end of the stroke. In the timeline, select the stroke that you made, color stroke 1. This allows you to modify only that stroke. Set color to orange. The stroke changes to orange. Now, set the color modulation menu to direction. Set color alt to red. Direction varies the color between color and color alt depending on the direction that the brush moves across the composite window. When the brush moves from left to right, color is used. When the brush moves from right to left, color alt is used. When the brush moves from top to bottom, or from bottom to top, a blend of the two colors is used. Try some of the other choices in the color modulation menu and see how they affect the stroke. Note that some of the choices only work with a Wacom tablet. When you're done experimenting, return the menu to direction. Here we'll continue to work with the paint controls. Make sure that color stroke 1 is still selected in the timeline. Set the opacity modulation menu to tilt. Set opacity alt to 25. Tilt varies the opacity between opacity alt and opacity depending on the angle of the pen as it moves across the tablet. Without a tablet, tilt uses the value set in opacity alt. Return the opacity modulation menu to none. Set the size modulation menu to velocity. Set size alt to 200. Set size to 20. Velocity varies the size between size alt and size depending on the rate that the brush moves across the composite window. When the brush moves slowly, size alt is used. When the brush moves more quickly, size is used. Set dab spacing to 30, flatness to 85, and angle to 45 degrees. Make sure that color stroke 1 is still selected in the timeline. Choose Spray from the Brush Type menu, and then set the spec type to Dot. Note that the track name changes to Spray Stroke 1. Set the Brush Type menu to Roller. The media located on the brush image track appears. Change the Roller Angle menu from Follow Path to Angle Control. Rotate the angle dial and observe that the roller or ribbon appears to be in 3D space. In the timeline, change the media that is being used for the brush image by clicking on the V1 button on that track and selecting a movie clip. Press the play button in the composite window and observe that the movie now plays within the paint stroke. In this part of the tutorial, we'll use the paint effect as a masking layer. Deselect any selected tracks in the timeline. Press Ctrl K to create a new 3D plane track in the timeline. Click the disclosure triangle next to the newly created track to reveal the track's mask track. Drag the paint track onto the mask track of the new layer. The mask is now in the shape of the nested paint path. Set the CTI to frame 0. Select the Roller Stroke 1 track to access the parameters for this stroke. Set the brush type to Spray. In the Animation tab, set Stroke End to 0 with linear interpolation. Play the effect and observe that the new track appears to be sprayed on with an aerosol spray can. In this part of the tutorial, we'll use Paint's cloning abilities in conjunction with motion tracking to remove a moving object from a scene. This part of the tutorial uses a QuickTime movie file, bostonbirdloop.move. Locate this file before proceeding with the tutorial. Delete the current tracks from the timeline. Press Ctrl K to create a new 3D plane track in the timeline. Press the track's media icon, choose Movie File, and navigate to the bostonbirdloop.move movie file. The movie appears in the composite window. Press Ctrl D to duplicate the Boston Bird Loop.move track. Set the duration of the composition to 100 frames. You might need to set the time view menu to absolute frames in the timecode palette to do this. Deselect any selected tracks in the timeline. Choose Filters, Motion, Motion Tracker to add a motion tracker filter to the timeline. Click the disclosure triangle for the motion tracker filter track to reveal the source subtrack. Drag one of the Boston Bird Loop.move layers onto the motion tracker source subtrack. In the tool window, make sure the solid arrow tool is selected. Select the motion tracker track and then click the monitor icon on the motion tracker track to open the motion tracker viewer. Drag the target center onto the bird. For best results, increase the magnification of the window. Click the green Analyze Motion Path button at the bottom of the Controls window. The bird's motion is analyzed. When the analysis is complete, close the Tracker Viewer window. Click the disclosure triangle on the motion tracker track to hide its subtracks. Deselect any selected tracks in the timeline. Choose Filters, Effects, Paint to add a paint filter. Drag the motion tracker track onto the paint track. Select the paint path track. Click the Reset button at the bottom of the Controls window to restore any parameters to their defaults. Set the following values for the stroke that you are going to make. Brush type, clone. Opacity modulation, none. Size modulation, none. Size, 30. Hardness, 0. Flatness, 0. Dab spacing, 15. Angle, 0. Clone from menu, self. Press the Alt key on the keyboard and move the cursor over the composite window. The cursor becomes a crosshairs. Click just above the bird to set the clone source location. Release the mouse button. In one stroke, paint over the bird until it blends with the sky background. Return the composite window to its normal size. Click the play button to preview the effect. The clone is now motion tracked and hides the bird throughout the clip.